Hi, listeners. Welcome to the She Speaks Life podcast, a weekly encouragement where we share our God stories. I'm your host, Jayme Elizabeth, and I am so glad you are spending time with us today to listen. Hi, friends. I am so glad you are with us today. I'm excited to have founder and CEO of Sanctuary Project, Holly Christine Hayes, sharing her God story with us today. Sanctuary Project is a survivor-run nonprofit social and jewelry enterprise employing and empowering women who have survived lives of trafficking, violence, and addiction in Austin, Texas. Holly and I met years ago at church, and I've had so much fun watching God orchestrating and demonstrating his mighty works of blessings over Holly and Sanctuary Project and pretty much everything she puts her hands on. Holly, thank you so much for being here on this cold, windy day here in Austin.
Jayme, I love it. This is my kind of weather. I feel like it's finally fall.
Yeah,
This is
I
good.
think so. And it's almost winterish.
I know Austin doesn't have a fall. It just goes summer and then winter.
100 degrees and then 30.
Yeah, it was 90 last week.
I know.
Come visit Austin. We have summer and winter.
Yeah, that's it.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is so fun. Okay, there is so much that we have to talk about, and I'm so excited. It's packed full. And so, if you want to just start out by giving a little backstory about yourself and really how your nonprofit became a burden on your heart and how that came about. For you.
So I grew up in a family in California. I know you're from California as well,
California girls.
Grew up in a liberal family and not a family of faith. So I had never really met any people of faith growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. But over the years, I struggled with several things that I think started to affect my identity from a really young age. So in my early childhood, around ages 3 to 4, I suffered from some sexual abuse from a caretaker. And I think that really started to shape my young childhood.
Sure.
I was a really fearful child and no one really understood why. I didn't understand why. I remember I would have like night terrors every night and run into my parents' room and was just so overwhelmed with fear and anxiety and depression, even from a really young age. Fast forward to my middle school years, and that really escalated. And by that time, I actually became very suicidal. And in my freshman year of high school, when I was 14 years old, I discovered drugs and alcohol for the first time. And everything changed from that moment. I actually found what I thought was going to be my solution for dealing with all of that fear and all of that anxiety and all of that depression. The first time I tried drugs and alcohol, it was alcohol first that night and then drugs later that same night. So it actually, I say drugs and alcohol because it all happened at once for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a progression.
Yeah. Some people it's gradual.
Right.
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like the moment I put alcohol into my system for the first time, it took over everything about my mind, my soul, my body, and my life. And it started making choices for me. And the first choice it made was, let's do drugs too.
Sure. Yeah.
And the next choice it made was, maybe men will make me feel better. Maybe throwing myself at men will help me to feel okay about myself.
Right.
And so that started that night as well. So from that first night I tried drugs and alcohol, everything about my life changed. And all of a sudden I had this reputation of being this, addict and alcoholic and very promiscuous. And, I just gave away my sexuality really to anyone that gave me any attention at all because I was so hurting and just
looking
really
for love in all the wrong places. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
Totally. And looking for that assurance that I was enough or that I was okay. And so I chased that, and that went downhill really quickly for me. So by the time I was 15, I was drinking and using drugs every day. And by the time I was 16, I dropped out of high school and ended up in my first abusive relationship, which led to my first of 5 abortions.
Oh, wow.
And then by the time I was 18, I started getting arrested and actually got my first job as a sex worker. And was recruited by another girl who told me that it would be empowering. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I'm already giving this away. So I might as well get paid for
get
it,
paid.
right?
Yeah.
And maybe that would be a
Oh.
step up, and
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
I would actually take back control of my life in some way.
Sure.
And so that progressed. And by the time I was 19, I met my trafficker. And from the moment we met, he saw all of that in me. He saw the insecure girl who was looking for any sort of validation. He saw the girl who suffered from trauma and abuse. He saw someone that he could easily exploit. And he developed a relationship with me. And after about a year, he started trafficking me. And at that time, my addiction had progressed so far that I actually kept getting drunk and high and not showing up for the jobs he was lining up for me. And so at that point, he actually kicked me out. And I like to joke that you'd think being trafficked is like the worst thing that can happen to you in society. But I actually went one lower and failed at being trafficked and ended up getting kicked out and becoming homeless because my trafficker didn't want me anymore.
Right.
So yeah, pretty
Didn't
bad.
show up for the job.
Yeah. That's a low.
Yeah. Oh, man. Wow.
So in February of 2001, I was homeless and I was on the floor of a public bathroom, and 3 words fell out of my mouth. I said, God, help me. And I'd never believed in God. I had no experience with God. Anyone who did believe in God was someone I ran from pretty quickly. They were not going to fit my lifestyle. And so I didn't even know any God people. But in that moment, the only thing I could think to say or to pray was, God, help me. And that very night, I ended up meeting someone who got me into a recovery program. And I've been sober and safe and housed and free from trafficking since that day, which was February 11th of 2001. So it's almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in February.
Wow.
So,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
That is so amazing.
Yeah, God did a mighty work. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really easy for me to point to his mercy and his goodness, and just knowing that all I had to do was cry out in one moment and he was right there.
Yeah.
So ready. Like he'd just been waiting for those words.
Yeah. I love that. And there's something about God help me that just those 3 words, like you were saying, I had a moment with God just with those 3 words when I was needing him so desperately and he showed up. So when I heard you say that in your book, From Basement to Sanctuary, we'll talk about that in a little bit. When I read those words, I'm like, yes, there's something. I mean, it was just like this SOS call to God,
Yeah, there's something about those words. I said them today.
Yeah.
I think they're probably the most powerful 3 words we can say in the English language.
Yeah.
And there's something about a bathroom floor, right? And there's something about sort of being at the end of ourselves in sin. And I like to joke that at some point in any life, you can point to the moment that you were on the bathroom floor in your sin.
Yeah.
Like I think every single person can say, yep, I have a bathroom floor moment. Yep, I that moment where I was driven to the absolute end of myself in my sin, and I ended up on a bathroom floor, and it's always a bathroom. I don't know why. It's just
the lowest of low.
Yeah, it is
the dirtiest
right?
place.
Yes, this is it. I'm on the floor of the bathroom. I'm at the end of myself.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere to go but up from there.
Right. Oh, I love that. Okay, so tell us a little about how Sanctuary Project came about and how it all began. Yeah.
So from there, I so radically got to see my life transform in that moment. And even though it was a momentary thing, it was also a journey. And so, in that moment, I got sober, I got help, I turned my life around, but I still had to walk out an entire journey of learning how to live as a woman with all kinds of trauma and how to heal from that trauma and who this God was even. Who is this God that rescued me, right? I knew nothing about God. And so I spent a lot of years just learning and healing and growing in that. And once I'd learned and healed and grown in that a bit, I started mentoring other women who were coming out of trafficking and violence and addiction too. And over those years of mentoring women, I saw a common theme in these women that every single one of them was hitting the biggest struggles around transitioning into meaningful employment. And there were several reasons for that. One, most of the time, if a woman is coming out of a life like mine, a life of trafficking and violence and addiction and trauma, there are some practical things they don't have that would help them to get work. Like I dropped out of high school, right? So I didn't have a high school diploma even. I had a criminal record. I'd been arrested, which a lot of women who have lived in that lifestyle have been arrested either for prostitution or for drugs or things like that.
Right.
Often they're the victim, but they're being prosecuted like they're the criminal.
Yeah.
So I had a criminal record. I didn't have a high school or college education. And this is the case I saw with so many of the women I was mentoring.
Right.
And beyond the logistical, there are all kinds of emotional aspects to having a job that were a struggle. So from one perspective, you felt very valuable because when you were, maybe being taken care of by your trafficker, usually traffickers will keep a roof over your head, they'll keep food in your belly, they'll keep
Right.
you high if you're
Yeah.
addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
They'll even buy you things like, they'll get your nails done, or they'll buy you perfume or purses or things like that. And
That's why
so
some of them, when they do catch the people, the leaders, the girls don't necessarily want to leave every
absolutely.
time.
And
Yeah.
that was the
Right.
case for me as well,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you're being taken care of by
Right.
this man, right? And so it's kind of a Stockholm syndrome situation
Mhm.
where most of the time they've developed a relationship with you in some way, and then they're meeting all your basic needs, and they have created this situation where you don't feel like you can meet your own basic needs because of the addiction and because of the trauma and because you've just never done it before, right? And
Right.
so that was the case for me, absolutely. If
Mhm.
someone had said, "You're being trafficked, I'm going to rescue you," I would have been like, "No thanks, that's my boyfriend, bye."
Yeah, yeah.
I definitely did
Right.
not see myself as a trafficking victim.
Right.
I saw myself as an addict, and I knew that there
Mhm.
was domestic violence happening. And
Mhm.
so that's part of the reason I started identifying women as survivors of trafficking, violence, and addiction in the women I mentored, because it became imperative to give people an entry point that wasn't calling it trafficking, because a lot of times these women
Mhm.
don't know they're being trafficked.
Right.
So, because they're being well taken care of by their traffickers, they often don't know that they are capable of working and actually providing
Mhm.
for themselves. They've never actually had a job before, they've never worked. And
Right.
so, because I was seeing all these issues with transitioning into meaningful employment, I started to dream of a place where I could be a safe refuge for women coming out of that, but also provide meaningful and dignified employment. I'd seen it work well in an organization I worked with overseas in Thailand called Nightlight.
Oh.
They would bring the girls out of the brothels and they would teach
Mhm.
them to make jewelry.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was so sweet. I got to see them sitting in community with each other and just making beautiful things all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
And I started to wonder, why can't we do that here? Why don't we do that here in America with trafficking survivors here? Why is that just something we do overseas?
Right.
So the Lord birthed this dream for Sanctuary Project in my heart, and I started it in February of 2018. So we're
Mhm.
coming up on 3 years,
Mhm.
and it's been incredible. We've actually provided more than 10,000 hours of employment at this point to survivors of
Wow.
trafficking, violence, and addiction. We've employed 26 women over the last 2.5 years, and just seen lives completely
Yeah.
transformed. And
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen women go from really not even believing she could hold down a job to buying her first condo.
Right.
We've seen women
Yes.
come in who didn't have a relationship with God to being baptized and following Jesus. Seen women become mothers. I've become a mother even
Yes,
in
I
that time.
know you
But we've
have.
seen just such incredible transformation in just providing employment
Yeah.
for women in community.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so beautiful how you've done that. And I love that inspiration that you had overseas and implement that here. And I love how God works in a way of just filling in those gaps where you feel like there is a need for that. I'm going to go and do that as best as I can with God's strength. And
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think one of the things I saw too, in just specifically in the products that were being created, they were like these sweet little beaded bracelets and things like that. And I remember looking at it and thinking, why aren't you making jewelry that's like on trend and,
Yeah.
stuff that you would buy at Nordstrom? Like, why does it have to be beaded? Why does it have to be feathers? Why can't it
Yes.
be like dainty, beautiful gold pieces that I would buy
Mhm.
anyway? I have noticed over the years that compassion jewelry often has this sort of specific look to it, right?
Mhm.
I like to think of myself as someone who's a bit more refined. And so I would buy these compassion purchases, right? I'd buy a beaded bracelet,
Right.
but then I would never wear it because it
Right.
was like,
Wasn't
oh,
your style.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I really dreamed of making a jewelry line that was an elevated line as well. Why did
Mhm.
it have to be beaded? Why can't it be beautiful?
Right.
Why can't it be something elevated that these women can just feel so proud to make and to wear? And then it's something that's on trend that women actually want to buy and they want to wear.
Right.
And then they're wearing a cool new necklace that could be something that they got at Nordstrom that doesn't have any compassion purchase relation to it. But
Mhm.
then their friends are going to ask, oh my gosh, your necklace is so cute. And that sparks a conversation where they can talk about the mission and talk about what this necklace actually is.
Yes. And that's what I love about your jewelry line It's so trendy and it's so pretty
Thank
and
you.
it's sparkly and there's meaning behind it also. So you
Yes.
want to dive into some of those pieces that give off the meaning, because I love how there's something behind each piece.
Yeah, and we actually pray over every single piece. So,
So good.
we're not just making things that are, oh, this is cute and this is on trend. There are plenty of trends we pass up because we can't link them back to our mission.
Mhm.
What I love about what God showed me with the birth of Sanctuary Project was that He told me that all of the jewelry was going to point back to the word sanctuary.
Aw.
And so when I started the line, He showed me these visions of the marble pillars of old cathedrals in Europe and the stained glass windows and the religious icons and things, this nature sanctuaries,
Yeah.
beautiful gardens I'd walked through and
Mhm.
experienced sanctuary in.
Mhm.
And so everything in the line is meant to evoke a feeling of sanctuary. Everything in the line is meant to tie back to our mission. We recently developed a line called the Chain Breaker Collection. So all these chains started to come into style, and I was seeing them and I
Yes.
was like, oh, that's so cute. I want to do chains. And the Lord said,
Yeah.
because you're chain breakers.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, thank you, Jesus, that
Mhm.
He is the creative inspiration behind this. I am not a jewelry designer. I've never done this before. I set out to build something where I could have a community that empowered women, but
Mhm.
the jewelry is all Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, He gives me all the inspiration and all the ideas. And I'll be in an old sanctuary or something and look around and be like, ooh, that ceiling medallion would make a beautiful pendant
Yeah.
earring. Or
Now you're
so
seeing
I'm like,
jewelry everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do. I see jewelry
Uh,
everywhere. It's so cool.
oh,
It's been a really cool experience to really lean into Him as creator
yeah.
and trust Him to be the creative director of our company.
People can see it. I think women in general, I mean, we can sniff out kind of what's fake or that there's a pretend meaning, but because it's so God inspired, we can feel it with each piece because He's the one that gave you that inspiration of meaning of that piece.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah, it's got His anointing dripping all over each piece.
Well, that's our
Yeah.
prayer. And
Yeah.
we literally, so once a year, we have a little company retreat where we sit down and we put prophetic prayers on every single piece.
Oh, yeah.
And so as those pieces go out, they're actually going out with prayers on them for that woman that's receiving them. And we wait, we look at the piece and then we wait for the Holy Spirit to tell us, what is that prophetic prayer that you want to send out on this piece to every single woman that buys it? And so some of
Wow.
our pieces have prayers over marriages. Some of them have prayers over breaking old soul ties with like new age movement and things like that. Some of them have
Mhm.
prayers over just strength, warrior strength and healing. Some of them have prayers over peace, like bringing peace to homes, peace to minds. Some of them have prayers over breaking bonds of depression and
Oh
anxiety.
my
And that
gosh,
is like
it's
my
just
favorite thing we do is just
amazing.
like sitting down and saying, we are not just sending you a beautiful piece of jewelry.
Right.
We're actually going to send you a prophetic prayer over this that is going to change your life.
Yeah. Holy Spirit bumps all over my arms. I mean, this is just amazing how it's just prayed over each piece like that. And you just put in that much of godly wisdom in each one. So
Thank you.
good. And seeing God's hand all over your business and the jewelry, you just got into Target.com
Yeah.
online.
Yes.
How did that make you feel at the moment? I bet that was maybe, oh my gosh, I feel like I've arrived, but I don't
Oh,
know.
totally. It's so funny. The day we like finally signed the deal, I told the woman I'd been like working with kind of the whole time. I was like, I think I finally made my mom proud.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mom approval.
yeah,
Yeah.
the cool thing about it is that it's just been so clear that it's all God from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a door that no man could open. And the way it happened was just incredible. I mean, we had worked with a company out of New York that kind of helped small entrepreneurs and social enterprises like ours connect with craft fairs and things like that to sell their jewelry. Somehow Target had gotten in touch with them and asked to be connected to a few makers in Austin just to understand the maker community. And they were
Mhm.
not looking to bring any products into their stores or online or anything. But when the team from Target came to our offices, they so fell in love with our women and our
Mm.
mission and
Yeah.
the jewelry line that they actually were the ones that pursued us and kind of moved mountains to make this happen for us.
Wow.
And it's
That is God.
amazing. Yeah, the partnership is incredible too because it actually because we're on Target.com, all of the orders actually come through to us, and our women are able to fulfill every single one of those orders. So this wasn't even just us making everything and sending it to Target.
Right.
This is a woman, a survivor, who will receive that order, package that order, and send that order out every single time an order comes in from Target as well. And so for us, it's just such a blessing. So we were able to hire 4 more women pretty immediately as soon as we started the process of launching on Target. It's just such a gift. It's just been unbelievable to see how God has blessed our obedience.
Yeah.
And every single person, the other thing he told us to do was every single person on our team is a survivor. So our operations director, our office manager, our program director, our social media manager, every single person on our team is a survivor.
Wow.
And it's just been so cool to see him provide those women too in the right
Yeah.
season, where my board actually told me early on, whenever you need to fill a role, just pray that woman in. And so I committed to that and just said, okay, Lord, like, all right, we need an office manager.
Yeah.
Lord, send an office manager who's a survivor.
Yeah.
And he has so faithfully every time. So it's just such a special community.
Yeah, it takes me to that verse, you do not receive because you do not ask.
Yes.
And you're like, oh yeah, I should pray about this.
I think of that all the time.
Mhm.
And it's, running a business has been such an exercise in asking the Lord.
Yeah.
Asking him to provide, asking him for specific numbers.
Mhm.
I mean, I have gotten bold with him to ask, hey, Lord, we need this amount of money to make our operating budget. Will you send it? And I don't care how you send it. Send it in a donation. We're a nonprofit, so people can donate. Send it in a big wholesale order, but will you send it? Because we need to care for these women. And without fail, he provides.
Yeah, so good. Now, how do the survivors contact you? Say they're wanting to step out. How do they end up finding you?
Most of the women we work with, I've met in Travis County Jail.
Okay.
So I go into Travis County Jail on Tuesdays and teach a class on trafficking. And I'm able to give my testimony there. And most of the time, what ends up happening is they hear my testimony and they're probably for the first time in that moment identifying as a trafficking survivor.
Wow.
Because I share my story of not knowing that my situation was trafficking and then explain what it looked like.
Yeah.
They're able to then identify in that moment and say, oh my gosh, me too. And so most of the women I establish first contact with while they're in Travis County. And then I work as an advocate with them while they're in Travis County still to help them arrange for housing and things like that when they get out, arrange for social workers and whatever the needs are. And then once they're out, we're able to bring them into Sanctuary Project and into our employment program. And we have 2 phases of that. So we have our job training program, which is for women who are just coming out of that life. And that's 8 hours a week where they're making jewelry, they're packaging orders, they're sort of learning the basics of just working again.
Yeah.
And that 8 hours a week gives them time and space in their day to actually do the other work they need to heal, to be getting counseling, to be just processing some of their trauma, to be just working on themselves. And then we have our Survivor Leader program, which is all of the leadership team. So all those women I was mentioning that are in more executive roles, that's all our Survivor Leader program. And so our hope for the women in the job training program is within a few months to help them find a full-time job, either with us in our Survivor Leader program or somewhere outside that is more in line with what their giftings and their dreams are.
So cool. And are you able to provide counseling? I mean, since you've had people that know what it was like, they came out of it, do you provide that as well with the job training?
Yeah, so we have something called a peer support recovery specialist. So our program manager provides an hour of counseling every week for the girls. But then we're not actually counselors. We're not social workers. We're not licensed therapists. And so every girl who's working in our job training program is required to have that as well. And then what we're providing is more of a coaching. So we're helping her to define her goals and establish what she really wants for her life, and then make sure that she has all the support around her that she needs for her recovery. And that's through what we call that peer support recovery specialist.
Gosh, yeah, you're covering every area. So good. And only God can make sure that you strategically have all that in place.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Only God.
What are some ways that we can actively advocate and eradicate this issue?
I think to be aware of what trafficking actually is. But I think the biggest thing we can do is make sure that we're fighting for policies to change around the incarceration of victims, things like that, fighting for victims' rights so that we're advocating for these women who, once they've identified themselves, can actually step forward and prosecute their traffickers and start to heal. I think
Yeah.
the biggest issue I see is that the system as it's set up right now is not able to easily identify the trafficking survivor. The right
Mhm.
questions are not always being asked. So as a lay person, the best thing you can do is just get educated about it from good nonprofits and resources, and then make sure that you're talking to your local government about how they're handling trafficking cases.
Yeah, probably 5 years ago, I was at a women's Christian conference and they had an advertisement on what you can do to help human trafficking that's in your area. And I don't think I ever thought about that. And I
Mm.
even know this really exists today, that we really have this going on. So I'm 5 years in of educating myself of how much it is everywhere. It's in your neighborhood, it's in your city.
And
Yeah.
we're all new at it. It really was only about 10 years ago that laws started being formed around it. And
Hmm.
only about, 10 to 15 years ago that nonprofits started forming to come alongside survivors. Something that I think a lot of people want to think is just happening overseas and want to think it's not
Right.
happening in their neighborhoods or their communities, but it happens anytime someone is economically challenged,
Hmm.
they're going to be ripe for exploitation. And so the biggest areas we see it are in the foster care system, lower
Right.
income communities. Anytime someone is at risk for financial insecurity, that's where traffickers are going to target. That's
Mm.
why young women who are addicted get targeted, because
Right.
they're at risk for that financial insecurity. And
Mm.
traffickers know that, and they're smart, and they're recruiting
Mhm.
from those places.
I was shocked to hear a friend of mine. She is a big advocate because she had almost her I think she was 3 years old, 4 years old, being snatched out of her arms at a checkout stand in a grocery store. And it turns out that a woman was helping her sex trafficker, I guess, kidnap small kids. So it can go very young to where they're kidnapping young kids to get them in human trafficking.
Yeah, it can happen. The overwhelming majority of cases we see are not that,
Okay.
which I think is important for people to know, because there is this idea out there that it looks like the movie Taken, right? And that it is
Sure.
someone
Yeah.
being snatched, and that at any moment your child could be
Mhm.
snatched. And certainly
Mhm.
that can happen,
Right.
but it's very, very, very rare.
Okay.
The overwhelming majority of cases we see are the trafficker was a known person. And so, most of the time,
Okay.
right now, what we're seeing is that traffickers are targeting young girls and women on social media. They're targeting them through Snapchat, they're targeting them through Instagram, they're targeting them through those social media channels, and they're establishing relationship with them. I think in the olden days, many years ago, we did see more kidnapping cases with trafficking, because that was how traffickers had to do it to get
Right.
children.
Yeah.
But sadly, today, it's so easy for a trafficker to get access to a child through their online portals, through social media, that we
Mhm.
actually don't really see as many kidnapping cases happening, because the traffickers are just recruiting through online channels.
Yeah.
And there they're
It's
able to
just sad.
see, is a girl insecure? Is she putting herself out there?
Mm.
How many friends does she have? Are there a lot of people watching? The trafficker can get all the information they need about whether you're an easy target or not from your social media. And
That's so
so,
scary.
as parents, I like to encourage people, please do not be afraid that your child is going to be kidnapped.
Right.
It's a horrible story. It happens.
Right.
Please do not live in fear that that's what's going to happen. But your child is going to get contacted by someone online. I
Mhm.
cannot say that
Yeah.
firmly enough.
Right.
Your children will be contacted online by
Mhm.
dangerous people. And so, the more you can have regulations around their social media, around what they're allowed to do, around what they're allowed to post, the more protective you can be as a parent, just being in there, looking at their DMs, making
Yeah.
sure you know who they're talking to.
Mhm.
That's the best thing we can do as parents, and really spreading awareness around that. And, I've seen a lot of people who've gotten fearful about even showing their children on social media because they think someone's going to come and kidnap them. That's
Yeah.
not what we're seeing.
Right.
What we're seeing is traffickers specifically targeting girls who are at risk,
Yeah.
specifically targeting girls who don't have familiar connections, who don't
Right.
have mom and dad watching them at every moment,
Mhm.
who don't have that support system in place,
Mhm.
because they're lazy and they
Yeah.
want those easy targets.
Yeah, so it's probably good to talk to your kids about maybe the red flags on
Absolutely.
social media and be aware,
Absolutely.
because there's nothing worse than being naive and going, "Oh, I didn't know." They can pretend that they're a teenager too and
Absolutely.
a girlfriend or whatever. So it's good to be aware.
Yeah. And in
Yeah.
the same way, you wouldn't let your 13-year-old daughter walk to the store alone at night because you
Right.
would worry about what would happen to her. Don't let your 13-year-old daughter be on Instagram alone
Yeah.
at night. You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I think that's where we have to really, as parents, take it very seriously.
Yeah, so good to know. All right, so let's talk about how did your own experience with trafficking equip you to lead your employees, and what do you enjoy most about leading your team?
So the thing I love the most about what we do at Sanctuary Project is that every single person is a survivor. So we know what each other have been through. You know, when COVID hit this year, I got to see everyone's fear and trauma sort of resurface. It was interesting to see everyone's trauma response to an insecurity, right? And to a very real threat that, you know, that came at them, a threat to their security, a threat to their health, all those things. And so what's so cool about that, I mean, obviously that has its challenges, right? I'm managing a team of a bunch of trauma survivors, which I'm constantly asking God, why did you do that to me? Why couldn't I have like 3 women who are healthy and well-adjusted, like leaders to come alongside me?
Now you're saying those 3 words, God help me.
Yeah. Exactly. So, but what's amazing about it is that there's so much grace and mercy for each other. There's so much grace and understanding that each of us has our own trauma and each of us is going to be re-triggered by things at any moment. And we all understand. No one is judging the other person when they're crying at work. No one is saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you overreacted to that. Or why are you so upset that I criticized your work today? You know, everyone understands what we're all battling and what we're all coming from. So it's just this community of such grace and laughter. We laugh together like no community I've ever seen. I mean, we laugh about things that would probably horrify you guys, but but we all get it because we've been through such similar life experiences.
Oh, wow. One big family there, huh?
Yeah, it really is.
Well, I got to read your book and it is just so amazing. It's so well written. And you go through the Lord's Prayer and how to go through recovery of anything really of bondage, a stronghold. And I won't give further detail because I do love how you have the whole structure set up on each chapter, which I highly recommend listeners to go out there and get her book. I love it. So tell me about like that whole process of getting that book out there, and do you offer that then to your survivors?
Yeah, so you know, writing a book is not for the faint of heart.
Right. I've heard.
It was a really incredible journey of just growing and healing even further for me, and just wanting to offer women who knew they were suffering from something but maybe wouldn't have been able to identify it as easily. I wanted to offer a solution for those feelings. You know, my trauma was really clear. My issues were very clear. It was clear that I was addicted to drugs, that I was homeless, that I had sexual trauma. All those things were clear. And so when I went into my healing journey with Jesus, I knew what I was healing from. But there's a lot of women in the church who we suffer from sometimes like a low level fear or anxiety or depression or a struggle, maybe an eating disorder or a control disorder or an anger disorder or, you know, just sin, really. We all have sin. And sometimes we don't know where that's coming from and we don't know how to get access to healing from it. And so what I walked out in the book is just these are the practical steps I took to heal and that I really believe anyone can take to heal. And so, I wanted to give good biblical guidance on healing. You know, sometimes healing can happen in a moment and sometimes healing is a journey and a process. And for me, it was a journey and a process. And so if you're someone who's in that, I wanted to give a solution, a real journey focused solution to getting healing. And all of our ladies have read it, I think. I mean, if they haven't, they at least pretend they've read it, right? And they're like, oh yeah, your book.
Give me the cliff notes. No.
Like someone should write a book about the steps to healing and surrender. I'm like, I did. Did you not read my book?
Yeah.
But what's so funny is I have, I've given out
a test one night.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
I've given out a bunch of them in the jail. And, you know, when you're in jail, there's not a lot to do other than read. And so I'm like so famous in the jail in Travis County. People are like, oh my gosh, you're Holly Christine Hayes, author of From Basement to Sanctuary. And they'll like fangirl and go crazy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, girl, like I'm just a fellow ex-con.
I'm like you, but I'm out now.
But it's really sweet how many women are reading it in jail, which I love. I just love that. I mean, there's nowhere I would want it more than in jails.
Oh, I bet you could see the purpose in hindsight. You're like, oh my gosh, little did I know that this book was going to reach women in prison.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Little did I know my whole life would have any sort of impact, you know? I mean, I think that's where I'm constantly amazed at God that he would take, you know, just a broken, failed prostitute and give me this life of impact. And I'm blown away by that every day. Before we started recording, Jayme and I were talking about just like, you know, the sort of pinch me moments in life. And I was talking about Sanctuary Project, and we have this back warehouse building, and then we have a front showroom, and our offices are upstairs. And we have it's just this beautiful white sanctuary looking building in a really cool neighborhood in Austin. And whenever I'm walking between our warehouse and workshop into our showroom front building, I always have this moment of overwhelm of just, oh my gosh, God, I can't believe what you've done. I can't believe what you've built. Yeah. I can't believe you would take a life like mine and turn it into just something so beautiful and glorious.
It is. It's so beautiful. Like ashes to beauty. Yeah. I mean, it was just amazing.
That sounds like a jewelry line. I should do something with ashes.
There you go. I think so too. Sounds good. I know. I love watching how God's working in and through you and just taking you from literally glory to glory to glory. And I love all of it. You have an amazing heart for others and compassion for those survivors. And I know what we go through, God turns it into good. And that's definitely
He sure does.
What he's been doing with you. And congratulations on your online Target.
Thank you.
Jewelry line. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, thank you. It's super exciting. So holiday shopping, you can shop at sanctuaryproject.com or on target.com and just search Sanctuary Project and you'll see our pieces there.
So good. Well, thank you, Holly, for coming on here.
Thank you for having me, Jayme.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening today. I trust that God has encouraged you through this message. For more information on this ministry and to access free downloads, please visit my website at jaymeelizabeth.com and sign up. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Jayme Elizabeth She Speaks Life. That's Jayme Elizabeth She Speaks Life. Until next time, my friends, I pray God reveals himself through your own life story.